She walked into the wedding alone, wearing a plain dress, her hair simply tied back. No makeup, no flashy jewelry. In a room filled with elegance, high-end fashion, and polished appearances, she was invisible. Guests whispered. Some chuckled. Others wondered who let her in. They assumed she was lost, maybe someone from the catering team, or a relative no one had heard of. But what no one realized was that this quiet, unassuming woman was far more important than any of them could imagine. She was the groom's wife. Not his fiancée, not an ex, his actual legal wife. From the very beginning, this wasn't a typical wedding. The venue was extravagant, the guest list filled with celebrities and high-profile names. The groom, a young billionaire known for his charm and business success, stood confidently at the altar. Everyone admired him, envied his lifestyle, and celebrated what they thought was the perfect match with his beautiful bride-to-be. But behind the perfect image was a truth no one saw coming. As the ceremony moved forward, the woman stood quietly at the back. No one offered her a seat. Some even asked her to leave. She didn't argue. She didn't make a scene. She simply watched, waited, and when the right moment came, everything changed. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. The whispers stopped. The cameras turned, and suddenly, the woman everyone had overlooked became the center of attention. Who was she? Why was she really there? And most importantly, why had the groom never mentioned her? This is the story of how appearances can deceive, how love can be hidden in plain sight, and how one simple woman turned an entire wedding upside down with nothing but her presence. But the real twist? That was still to come. Everyone froze. The music faded, the laughter died down, and all eyes slowly turned toward the back of the room. The woman, still standing there quietly, finally stepped forward. Her face calm, almost too calm for the moment. People began whispering again, but this time the tone had shifted. There was something about her that didn't match the assumptions they had made earlier. She wasn't confused. She wasn't embarrassed. She looked like she belonged there, and that made people nervous. A few of the groom's relatives exchanged glances. One of them leaned over and whispered something, eyes
wide.
The bride looked confused, glancing at her soon-to-be husband, who now stood pale and still at the front of the aisle. That's when the woman reached into her bag and pulled out something small. Papers. She didn't raise her voice or cause a scene. She simply walked toward the front, each step quiet, but heavy with meaning. No one knew her name yet, but her presence had become impossible to ignore. Some guests started to remember seeing her before, briefly in business photos with the groom, or passing by in luxury events but never introduced. She never made headlines, never attended the flashy galas, but she had always been there, in the background. And now, she wasn't in the background anymore. Whispers turned into questions. Was this woman really his wife? How could a billionaire hide something like that? And why, on the very day he was marrying someone else? Was she choosing to appear? The groom looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. The bride clutched her bouquet tighter. Every second dragged like hours. Whatever truth this woman carried was about to change everything. But for now, no one knew exactly what she would say, or how far the shock would go. The papers in her hand were neatly folded, not dramatic, not flashy, just official. She handed them quietly to the groom without saying a word. His hands trembled, slightly as he took them. A few of the guests sitting close enough could see the seal on the document. It was real. A marriage certificate. Her name signed next to his. A legal, binding record. Suddenly, the entire room felt smaller, tighter. People looked at each other, trying to process what this meant. The bride's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. She turned to the groom, waiting for him to deny it, to explain, to say anything. But he just stared at the document, frozen. His silence spoke louder than any words. The bride's family started murmuring, clearly upset. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a public humiliation. A high society wedding, interrupted by a secret wife no one even knew existed. Behind the scenes, the wedding planner was panicking, guests were already texting, and phones started filming. This wasn't just a wedding anymore, it was about to become a headline. Billionaire groom caught in wedding scandal was only a matter of time, and still, the woman, the wife, stood silently. No tears, no anger, just presence. Calm, steady, and heartbreakingly human. People started to wonder what her story was. How long had they been married? Why had she stayed hidden? Was it a marriage of love or convenience? And what had finally pushed her to step into the light? One of the groom's close friends quietly slipped away from the crowd and stepped outside to make a call. Rumors were already spreading. Some said the groom had kept her a secret to protect his reputation. Others believed he had used her, then moved on. But no one really knew the full truth yet. All they knew was, this wedding was no longer about love. It was about secrets. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. No one dared to speak too loudly now, afraid they'd miss whatever came next. The billionaire groom still hadn't said a word. He stood there, clutching the marriage certificate, eyes darting between the woman who had just walked in, his wife, and the woman standing beside him in a white designer gown, waiting to become his bride. The tension was unbearable. The bride finally stepped forward, her voice trembling but sharp. "Is this true?" she asked, not even looking at him but at the woman who had shattered everything with a single step. Still, the woman didn't speak. She simply nodded. That was enough. Security hesitated by the doors. No one gave the order to remove her, because deep down they all sensed this wasn't someone who had crashed the wedding for drama. This was someone with a story that couldn't be silenced, a woman who had something real to say, and everyone wanted to hear it. One of the older guests, a respected business partner of the groom, stood up slowly. He stared at the groom with disappointment. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long have you been hiding this?" His words seemed to echo across the room. That's when the groom finally opened his mouth, but still couldn't speak. His lips moved, but no sound came. It was like the truth had caught in his throat. The bride's parents were already talking to lawyers in hushed tones near the side of the room. Deals, reputation, everything was on the line now. This wasn't just a love triangle. It was a corporate and social bombshell. And then, the woman reached into her bag once more. This time it wasn't papers. It was a phone. She held it up, and the screen lit. Everyone turned to look. "You should all see this," she said, her voice calm but firm. The room fell completely silent. Whatever she was about to show would change everything. She held the phone high, her hand steady, her eyes locked on the groom. A single swipe, and a video began to play. The room leaned in, breath held. The video wasn't shaky or edited. It was clear, recent, and undeniable. There he was, the groom, in a private setting. Not just with her, but laughing, holding her hand, calling her his wife. The video had a timestamp, just 2 weeks before the wedding, and it wasn't business-related. It was intimate, personal, real. Gasps echoed through the hall. The bride dropped her bouquet. The groom's best man cursed under his breath. People scrambled to turn off their phones, unsure if they should stop filming or record every second of what was quickly becoming a scandal far beyond anyone's imagination. But that wasn't the twist. Just as the video ended, the woman turned the phone around and tapped a second file. "There's more," she said. Her tone didn't shift. Calm, composed, almost heartbreakingly dignified. The second video started with the groom's voice, not to her, but to someone else. Another woman. A different voice. He was making promises. The same promises he'd once made to his wife. And suddenly, the focus shifted again. There wasn't just one betrayal in the room. There were layers. Now the bride wasn't just hurt. She was furious. Her pain gave way to shock, then rage. "How many women?" she asked, stepping back from the altar. The guests no longer whispered. Some stood up to leave, while others just stared, frozen, not knowing how to react. The groom, still speechless, looked like the walls were closing in. His empire of charm, secrecy, and careful appearances was crumbling, live, in front of everyone. What was meant to be the biggest celebration of his life had turned into something else entirely. And the woman, once ignored, had just revealed that this story was far from over. The room was in chaos. Guests were standing, some leaving in disbelief, others whispering furiously. The bride's father was red-faced, barking at the groom's legal team, demanding answers. The groom, finally finding his voice, tried to step forward. "It's not what it looks like," he said hoarsely, but the words were too late. No one believed him now. The woman, the real wife, looked him in the eyes for the first time that day. "You told me to stay out of sight, to protect your image, to give you time," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And this is what you used that time for?" Her voice didn't break. It was steady, honest, and full of everything she had held in. The bride walked straight past both of them and dropped her engagement ring onto the floor. It landed with a sharp sound, like punctuation. "You deserve each other," she said coldly, then turned and walked away with her head high, leaving the crowd stunned. But just when it felt like the storm had peaked, the woman held up one more paper from her bag, a signed prenuptial agreement. It stated that if the groom committed infidelity, she would receive 50% of all his holdings. And it was dated, legal, ironclad. The guests gasped again, but this time in awe. She hadn't just exposed him. She had outsmarted him. The groom's face turned pale. The woman looked around the room, not with pride, but peace. "I didn't come here for revenge. I came to end the lies," she said quietly. "And now I'm done." She turned to leave, but then paused. A young woman in the crowd stepped forward. She looked nervous, holding her phone. I have something to say too," she said, looking straight at the groom. And just like that, the room froze again. Another secret was waiting to be revealed. All eyes turned to the young woman now standing at the front. Her voice was shaky, but her words were clear. "I worked with him. He promised me things too. A future. Said the marriage was just for appearances. That it would be over soon." She paused, glancing at the woman who had started it all. "I didn't know you were real. I'm sorry." There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just silence, and the weight of too many truths finally out in the open. The groom stood frozen, his image shattered, his empire crumbling under the pressure of choices he could no longer control. The real wife looked at the young woman and gave her a small nod, not out of approval, but understanding. They had both been lied to. Both had believed the same man, only to find out the promises were empty. There was no more fight to be had, only freedom from the mess he had created. By the next morning, news of the wedding disaster was everywhere. Headlines labeled it "The Billionaire Wedding That Never Was" and "The Silent Wife Who Spoke Louder Than Anyone." The woman, once ignored and underestimated, became a quiet symbol of grace and strength. Not for revenge, but for standing up when it mattered most. She didn't ask for fame. She didn't give interviews. She simply walked away, with her dignity, her truth, and half of everything he thought he'd kept hidden. As for the groom, his reputation took a sharp fall. Business partners distanced themselves. The public, once enchanted by his charm, now questioned every deal, every headline. And the bride? She moved on. Quietly, gracefully, and stronger than before. In the end, this wasn't just a story about betrayal at a wedding. It was about truth catching up, about people revealing who they really are, and one simple woman reminding everyone that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truth.